I'm hesitant to draw that comparison because I frankly think the world of her. I'm very inspired by her. I'm eager to join her and support her. So in no way am I trying to draw a negative comparison with her. I'm just trying to answer the question that you asked me.
Oh, I was actually trying to draw a positive comparison, as in that it like, you know, your ability to defeat someone like Nancy Pelosi would probably be due in large part to the people.
Just be happy with who you are.
You know, our struggle to replace Nancy Pelosi is a big part of it. When my future colleague, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, removed Joe Crowley, I think that was the first crack in the dam. When we removed the party leader, I do think that the case to be made for corporate Democrats will be very, very difficult at that point. And I hope that that creates a lot of space, either for concurrent or for subsequent challengers, to repeat the feat, replace entrenched centrist incumbents with voices more committed and more existentially, let's say, dedicated to our communities. And I'm eager to be one of those voices. I think it will take more than just mine. And thankfully, there are more than just mine already there. I'm very inspired by Barbara Lee, by Pramila Jayapal, by Ro Khanna, by everyone in the squad. You know, I'm eager to join them and contribute to that struggle against the corporate center and the defense of human rights that we all share.
When you mentioned your colleague Alexandria, her campaign was in large part due to, you know, a groundswell support, definitely, like, you know, people canvassing of their own time. Have you followed that model? Is your campaign very similar in its execution?
I don't think it's similar. I mean, there's a lot of things that are different. I do get compared to her occasionally. In some respects, I think I more closely fit Ilhan Omar.
Okay.
Candidate profile. And so the campaigns, I'd say our 2018 campaign resembled very closely Representative Ocasio-Cortez's campaign. We ran in the same cycle on essentially the same platform. We got the same votes, or at least the same number of votes. And I'm back to finish the job. I did learn a few things watching her, particularly the importance of running for an entire cycle. But when I compare our campaigns, I say, you know, one of the biggest differences at this point, I mean, obviously she's a social media and traditional media behemoth, right? Like, she has a viral presence that I don't have. So I can't really compare our 2020 campaigns. Our 2020 campaign relative to her 2018 campaign, like relative to our 2018 campaign, is frankly leagues beyond it. You know, we have a fully professionalized team. We have hundreds, literally thousands of volunteers. We have 12,000 donors. And Ocasio 2018 in the primary phase, I don't think they hit quite that same level. So we're substantially faster. We're substantially heavier. We have a much broader reach than at that point in her race. My future colleague did. I'm hesitant to draw that comparison because I frankly think the world of her. I'm very inspired by her. I'm eager to join her and support her. So in no way am I trying to draw a negative comparison with her. I'm just trying to answer the question that you asked me.
Oh, I was actually trying to draw a positive comparison, as in that it like, you know, your ability to defeat someone like Nancy Pelosi would probably be due in large part to the people, right? It's very similar to what's happening with Bernie Sanders right now. The idea that you've got Mike Bloomberg spending an inordinate amount of money, $500 million, to, you know, try to put whatever kind of disinformation he can out there. Well, at the same time, it's the people who are knocking on the doors. It's the people who are canvassing. It's the people who are making the phone calls, right? And like, I imagine that has to be like an exciting new prospect, especially to this new line of progressives that are kind of taking over the Democratic Party right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel it in two different dimensions. One, when you talk about it's the people, I think about it being some of the same people fueling our various campaigns. So many supporters of Representative Omar, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, our soon-to-be President Sanders, are supporting our campaign, and I'm thankful for that movement-wide presence, let's say, that's growing around the country. There's a second dimension, which I feel very locally. I've had the fortunate experience, and it's been happening now for the last year in increasing frequency, where I'm just out on the street walking, you know, from one place to the other, waiting for the bus, and someone will shout me out or come running up to me. And like, it happens constantly now. I mean, I can't walk anywhere in the city without, you know, I was in the park earlier running and someone was like, "Beat Pelosi." Bus to where we had a meeting to come back to another site where I was going to be making some calls, and two people on the bus are like, "Oh, I just voted for you," you know, and I was out this morning meeting voters at 24th and Mission. It's a BART stop here, one of our transit stations. And I hear my name called. I can't figure out where it's from. You know, it's a big corner. There's a lot of traffic. And then I see two hands and a face sticking out of a bus window. I couldn't even recognize who it was. They were just like yelling and screaming as they went by. It was that kind of energy, and the presence in the community says to me that we have even more support than I see. We're at the point, it's really very humbling. I don't know how to describe it, but every time I look online, we have another 100 Twitter followers. we're having monster days fundraising. And I think a lot of it is from the growing national base of people who recognize the illegitimacy of the corporate center. They recognize that corporate Democrats are running us off a climate cliff. They recognize that Nancy Pelosi's late, limited, ultimately failed impeachment process was a failure demanding accountability. And they recognize that San Francisco deserves a voice in Congress that's aligned with our city instead of aligned with Wall Street and the Pentagon.
Speaking of like the deeply entrenched, I guess, like centrist Democrats, how much are you seeing yourself and others in the progressive movement actually pushing them out? Like, are we seeing a new evolution to the Democratic Party?
I think so. I mean, there's two dimensions to that. There's pushing them out, and then there's pushing them left.
Okay.
So one way I sometimes put this is that I'm pushing Speaker Pelosi to the left until I push her out of her seat. Exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
3 different examples of where I've seen her move, shifting positions, and I can also think of 3 different examples of campaign tactics, all of which she's adopted more recently that she didn't before. So just first on the subject matter, chronologically, the first was congressional war powers, where she has long resisted attempts to claw back the congressional oversight of the executive branch and Congress's authority, not the executive branch's authority, to escalate, initiate war conflict. She opposed proposed amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act by Representatives Ro Khanna and Barbara Lee, amendments that I favored and supported. And then she ultimately flipped to support the contours of those amendments, granted after the fact and after it was too late, but I saw her at least shift in response to the criticism. Impeachment was a second. She took a year to show up. And during that year, she was decidedly unwilling, publicly asserted her unwillingness to proceed with impeachment until we and a whistleblower and a national movement of critics forced her hand. And granted, what she ruled was inadequate, and predictably, I said at the time that that train would not reach a station and it would unfortunately hit a wall unless she included the president's corruption, which she refused to do. And we ended up, as a country, suffering a constitutional calamity as a result. The failure of the impeachment process to remove our criminal president has emboldened him. And the reason he is emboldened is because Speaker Pelosi refused to bring a real impeachment process that would have included the president's human rights abuses, incitements to violence, his repeated, recurring, and ongoing lies, and particularly his theft of public resources. So if those are the subject matter, the war powers, impeachment, the third I should say is labor rights. She recently moved to the House floor and passed the Protecting Right to Organize Act. This is the most visionary reform to labor law in a generation. Labor unions have long supported it. She has not until very recently. And it's another issue where we had drawn blood. I think her refusal to show up made it increasingly untenable for her to stand aside. And so she, recently shifted positions. And then I know I'm getting long-winded, but just to complete
No, you're not. Trust me. Keep going. It's music to my ears.
Appreciate that. Outside the subject matter and policy, also in the politics, we've seen Nancy Pelosi react to our campaign. So this year, just in the last month, last few weeks, frankly, for the first time in 30 years, she's running a local reelection campaign. She's text banking voters. They're running paid Facebook ads. She was here in the district shaking hands and kissing babies in Chinatown yesterday and talking about, there was my favorite, she got a fortune cookie that apparently said, "United we stand," in the fortune cookie. And it's ironic because the supervisor was united in unanimously supporting a resolution supporting Representative Pramila Jayapal's Medicare for All bill, which Speaker Pelosi refuses to even bring to the floor for a House vote. And so if we are united, it's not with Nancy Pelosi. It's around issues, principles, policies that she refuses to embrace. And I'm looking very forward to demonstrating how united the city is in favor of a progressive platform far to the left of Nancy Pelosi's corporate centrism this November.
No, that's amazing. In the event, well, okay, you know what? I'm just going to say this because I'm just so filled with optimism these days. So in the event that you make it past, you guys get in, you assume power, how are you going to enact a lot of these policies, especially the more what is considered radical, even though I think it's the furthest thing from radical. Things like Medicare for All should not be seen as radical, it should just be seen as the normal. But anyways, how are you going to enact a lot of these policies, especially if the Senate is still Republican, which unfortunately I still think there's a hard chance of that being the case.
Just in the question, you'd said something about me assuming power, and I just want to make clear that And I think the key to building the consensus for those paradigm shifting policies is to advocate for them in the body, in the chamber, to advocate for them online, in the media, to advocate for them in the street. I'm not afraid to show up in anybody's district talking about these issues. If there's a Democrat who's unwilling to back Medicare for all, I'll show up in their district and talk about the importance of backing the policy. And I'm not particularly timid around supporting and even recruiting candidates to primary those centrists. I owe nothing to the party establishment. The party establishment has done nothing for me. It's done, frankly, nothing for the people of the United States for a generation. And I'm eager to flip the table over. And with that seat in Congress, San Francisco voice in Congress, I think it will send a signal far louder than the loss of a single seat, because the person I'll be replacing is the leader of the party. And the fact that she's mounting a re-election campaign for the first time in 30 years, I think indicates that I smell blood. I think they might too. And I smell theirs and they smell their own. And at the end of the day, the vector is very clear to me. The question is, can we cover enough ground quickly enough to win in November? And the jungle primary structure here creates a remarkable opportunity. I don't need to win next week. I only have to place second. And then I have 8 more months to complete the process. And at the rate we're moving, the resources that we're pulling in, the ground that we're covering, the coalitions that we're building, and the reach that we're establishing, I'm very confident that I'll be representing San Francisco in the next session of Congress.
That's incredible. How much do you see the actual Democratic Party shifting towards the left? Like you said, there's 2 scenarios, right? There's either you're pushing the old guard out and you're replacing them with these new progressive candidates who are way more in tune to the Democratic Socialist side of the Democratic Party, or you're converting old people. Sorry, I shouldn't say old, but I just mean other entrenched. Yeah, exactly. Other entrenched centrist Democrats towards what would be seen as, I would say, a lot more popular opinion when it comes to these kind of policies. Like how much is shifting at this point?
Yeah. I think it's more about replacing them than it is shifting them. And I say my principal piece of evidence there, my exhibit A, if you will, is the remarkably illegitimate, horrifying, oligarchic, racist candidacy of Michael Bloomberg. And the idea that so many establishment Democrats have been willing to throw their lot in with another Trump, another racist New York oligarch, instead of the candidate who has demonstrably more support than any Democratic nominee in recent history. There's never been a nominee from either party that's won the popular vote in each of the first 3 contests. And that's exactly with the support of millions of Americans, including myself and folks on our campaign. And that's exactly what he's doing. And I'm very eager to support our next president instead of impeding his agenda. I think most of America, in fact, Bernie Sanders is demonstrating in each of these primaries that most of America stands with him, not with the corporate Democrats. And the question before the city is, do you want a representative in Congress who stands with our next president, Bernie Sanders, and I'm happy to do that, or do you want a voice that's willing to stand with our current president, as Nancy Pelosi has, on trade policy, on foreign policy, on fiscal austerity rules, on the funding for concentration camps, on the recognition of foreign leaders put into power by right-wing coups, potentially supported, though we don't know, by CIA covert activities that Nancy Pelosi helps keep secret. That's so sordid, ultimately. And I think the choice between the city could not be more clear. I think that, to one of your earlier questions, there is a construction of her, a rhetoric, a depiction that doesn't fit the reality. And my job and the work of my supporters over the next 8 months is to expose that reality, to pull back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz, to show to people that this supposed leader of the left has unfortunately been sadly complicit in our crisis in affordable housing, sadly complicit in the crisis in human rights at the border, sadly complicit in the global mounting climate crisis, in our endless wars abroad, in our metastasis of domestic surveillance, of the paramilitarization of police and police violence in our communities. On all of these issues, Nancy Pelosi has been decidedly, and I think disqualifyingly, if that's a word, absent. And that's the case we're aiming to make. There's one particular neighborhood here I could talk about if it's interesting, a glaring case of environmental racism.
Yeah, please.
Is an especially pointed contrast. It relates to Hunter's Point. It's a part of our city on the southeastern corner that is the site of a former Navy shipyard. And the Navy had for years, effectively decades, frankly, poisoned this neighborhood radioactively. So there was a radioactive deck marker found in some soil that was remediated from what is now a Superfund site. So it's acknowledged that the site has been contaminated, and the cleanup, which is now stretching into years, has been found to be fraudulent. Now, Saunders Point is one of the very last remaining African-American enclaves in our entire city. And the cancer rates in that neighborhood, the asthma rates in that neighborhood are both through the roof. People there have been looking for help for decades. I was recently at a community meeting where I heard longtime residents, including people, one who was a medical doctor on the faculty at the University of California, San Francisco, one of the most renowned medical institutions in the world, talking about the absolute inability to get any meaningful response from government officials. And the local officials have done what they can and noted that the Navy doesn't answer to them. The Navy does answer to Congress. It would be great if Hunter's Point was represented by a powerful member of Congress who would use their influence to go to bat for my neighbors of color who've been targeted for one of cases of environmental racism on the West Coast. We happen to have the most powerful member of Congress representing our city. And as far as I can tell, she hasn't lifted a finger. 2 weeks ago, an off-duty FBI agent shot one of my unhoused neighbors less than a block from my front door. I've been to 2 communities, and I've been fighting the FBI for 15 years, mind you, mostly for surveillance issues. And so this idea of an off-duty agent shooting somebody randomly is like just, bizarre, quite frankly, as well as unacceptable and enraging. And at each of the 2 community meetings that I went to last week, community members, including elected officials, local elected officials, were saying, this is totally effed up. It's not okay. And there's nothing we can do about this. There are, frankly, 3 people in the city who could do something about it. 2 are U.S. senators who are both from the city, Kamala Harris, Dianne Feinstein. I expect no help from either of them. Mm-hmm. Nancy Pelosi, this city's representative in Congress, she hasn't said a word. We co-organized a forum last weekend with CopWatch and DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, San Francisco. To my knowledge, it was the first time that the survivor's family spoke publicly. They FaceTimed him into the room from his hospital bed. He addressed the group, and it was, frankly, a really powerful moment to hear. And it's exactly what our federal representatives should be doing instead of, a schmo with a pen who lives down the street, who's cobbling together this ragtag army to liberate our city's voice in Congress. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Hey, you. Yes, you. Do you like cozy environments with other wholesome people? Well, then come join the Discord. It's got a whole bunch of stuff to help you with creative endeavors, such as stock footage, royalty-free music, and an amazing community of people looking to help each other out and uplift your content. Join the Discord now by going to weareserfs.com. That's weareserfs.com.
We would like to thank Miranda Marone. You are our monarch, and we thank you for our indentured servitude. We would like to thank our lords, Ricky Pilgrim, I'm Raft, Michaela Schmid, Tomospin, Ferrer Tajon. You are all the pillars of our organization. To our Knights of the Square Table, Paul Parafit, Daniel Kahn, Clement Chutskoff, Alan R., Josh Mickelson, and Dr. Zayas, Cooper Pilot, Andrea Lynn Epperly, Dylan Bythe, Terry, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. And to our merchants, thank you for taking mercy upon us.